am Sandeep, and you're watching the Indian Weekender. Right now, we are in the middle of election campaigning, with just 1.5 week away from the election night. And surprisingly, the conversation around the one of the most important issues facing our community, the issue of immigration, is muted. This is radically different to what we have witnessed and experienced in last election in 2017, where the debate around immigration was an intense, high decibel debate. So, what we are seeing right now is that all the parties are appearing to be equally evasive, non committable, and without a plan for immigration. So, why is this so? Are they too scared to come out and put their stakes down on the ground to address this complex issue of immigration in the current COVID environment just before elections? Or they are just clueless to understand how this COVID situation is unfolding and affecting our economy, the supply and demand of labor and migrant workers, and how they are going to address this issue. So, to discuss on this important issue, we are joined by three political leaders from different party. Our Kiwi Indian MP from Labour Party, Priyanka Radhakrishnan, Stuart Smith from National Party, and Dr. James McDowall from ACT Party to discuss and find out what's the future of immigration in this country. So, welcome to our virtual studio, ladies and gents. How are you all today?
Fine, thank you.
Very well, thank you.
Great. So, Priyanka, I would like to start with you. What's your party's view on this alleged, or rather allegation, that is the party too scared or clueless to respond on immigration issues just before this election?
Firstly, Sandeep, can I just thank you and Indian Weekender for organising this debate and having us on today. I will begin by saying that it has been a tough time for many, and it's immigration and border closures have made things a lot tougher for many. So can I just acknowledge that at the onset? Equally, though, the fact that we have managed COVID really well in New Zealand. The government's plan has always been to go hard and to go early. And we've had the leadership to execute that. Our communities have played a significant role in ensuring that that plan was adhered to, but also going out of their way to support those who needed a little bit of extra support during the COVID time. So given that this is the first forum of yours that I'm speaking on, I just wanted to acknowledge the role that our communities have played in that as well. The landscape has changed, though. However, before the landscape changed as a result of COVID, this government's focus when it comes to immigration has been really clear. There has been a little bit of scaremongering around that. However, the focus that we've had has been threefold. And it's been what we campaigned on in 2017, which was to eliminate exploitation, whether it was in the labour market space or export education. And we've taken steps towards that goal, and I'm happy to outline them later.
Sure.
The second component of that has been to ensure that we have a system that is fit for purpose. And that means ensuring that we can match the skills of migrants coming to New Zealand with the needs of employers. And we've regionalized that from the point of view that skills shortages are quite different in different parts of New Zealand. The third part of that is ensuring that we meet our international humanitarian needs. And so we've doubled the refugee quota, and we've removed the family link policy of the previous governments, which frankly we thought was racist because it stopped those from Africa and the Middle East from settling here or coming through as refugees if they didn't have close family already here. So we've taken steps there. That's been our broad view throughout our first term in government, and that remains our focus. Now, in terms of specific policies, going to your initial question about why there are none, we haven't released them yet, to be that's the simple answer, but they will be coming out soon, and I won't be preempting any of them in this forum.
Sure, I get that. But the important thing to remind yourself in the party is that advanced voting has already begun, and we are just probably 7 to 10 days away. And that would be a very short time for voters to decide what Labour Party's view is on immigration. And also to come back to your initial point that you made, which you have quite rightly and nicely sidestepped by saying that parties neither scared or clueless to respond on immigration issues. The performance of the immigration portfolio in last probably 3 odd years has been quite sluggish, very slow in responding, and we have been seeing huge ballooning of queues in every respect. So that's doesn't match with what you have just submitted.
That's not the stats that we have actually. So I'll push back a little bit
Mhm.
on that. I will take your point that there have been hiccups along the way. I'm not going to, I'm not blind to that. There have been hiccups along the way, and I'm quite happy to address them as well. But I don't think we've been sluggish, because in the areas that we have been focused on, for example, migrant worker exploitation, we've worked throughout the last 2.5 odd years to build an evidence base that we've never had in New Zealand of the scale and the severity of the exploitation that our people face when they come to New Zealand. It's an area that I've worked on prior to getting into Parliament as well. It's one that I've been incredibly passionate about for a long time. And I'm proud that our government has taken that seriously, because what we inherited was frankly a system where we had a nexus of exploitation between the export education sector and the labour market. And I know that because I've personally spoken to many of the victims of that exploitation and supported them through their
Well,
advocacy as
sure.
well over the
No, no,
years.
we get
So
that.
yeah, so we've taken a huge number of steps there to firstly build the evidence, but get to a point where we've committed to changes, both legislative, to ensure that we prevent exploitation from happening further down the track, that we assist those who have been exploited to get out of exploitative situations, steps that they've never had before in terms of delinking, MB and the reporting process from the immigration status. That's what people have asked for a really long time, and we've delivered on that. We are delivering on that. And
Okay.
also enforcement to ensure that our labour inspectorate is resourced enough to be able to step in and prevent exploitative employers from continuing to exploit. So we have moved. Processing times on certain issues or particular categories had gone up. I'll take your point on that, and it's an issue that many of us who've been working in this space over 3 years it's raised with the minister.
Sure.
It's an
You
issue
raised
that
some
he
valid
was
points.
asking.
Uh,
Yeah, so he was getting weekly updates from immigration on processing times, which actually have gone down. COVID now, of course, has changed all of that again, but I'll leave it at
sure.
that for now.
Definitely, and I will also have to park that your responses for some time, and I have to move to our other guest. So, speaking to National Party's immigration spokesperson Stuart, Stuart, what we have seen so far that despite Nationals' emphasis and for the demand of plans and policies from the Labour Party, we haven't seen any very clear immigration plan and policy for the coming term.
Well, I think the key point now is we don't know what the post-COVID world is going to look like. And so we really want to focus on the needs of businesses and so that those businesses will drive, and the skill gaps that we have will drive immigration policies. Unfortunately, at the moment, sluggish is an understatement. We put past the COVID response, or the immigration COVID response amendment bill months before they, under urgency, and it took months for them to make one decision out of that. The whole thing was rushed through under urgency, didn't quite get the scrutiny that it really should have had. However, we agreed to that because we saw the urgency in it, and the minister sat on his hands for months. I think it's been quite appalling the way it's been handled. And I think the two things between the main thing about immigration is we can't delink it from border control, and that's been an absolute train wreck by the way it's been managed by the government. But they've got it's so badly handled now they don't have any confidence to actually allow people to come across the border that we desperately need. And we think that is an important issue. There's certainly businesses and jobs being lost because we can't get essential skilled people across the border. So that's a significant issue for us here. And I don't see any change in that in the future. The processing of visas and things, it's a complete mess. I think Immigration New Zealand, the way they handle the processing of visas is antiquated. It's often paper-based. It's very slow. And we have the crazy situation, and I don't know about Priyanka, but I'm dealing with these sorts of things all the time, where people have to go and get a new police report. They haven't left the country in over 18 months. They've got to go and get a new police report to extend their visa, so they're while they await their results of their residency visa. And it's just an absolute waste of time. When you're talking about countries often where getting a police report is difficult, to say the least. Often money has to change hands that's not related to a fee.
Sure.
But,
Well, we are getting into processing issues, which I do understand are compelling issues. But just to make a point that probably you have made a very honest confession, which probably I haven't seen coming from any other political parties, when you say that we don't know about the future, and that basically takes us to a position of being clueless about how this post-COVID world will unfold.
No, not clueless. That's I would never use that term.
No, of course you haven't used that, but I have to categorize that somewhere.
I reject it. And I reject it. No one knows
I do too.
A post-COVID.
Fair enough. Well, that is where leadership, that is where country looks towards leadership, that how they envisage things or situation will change so that they have the right supply of labor based on the needs of the market and the businesses. That is where probably people, they are looking for leadership from the political parties. I do understand you would have reservations, but I would move on and speak to James, who is very patiently waiting over there. So James, you represent ACT Party, and based on how this ACT Party is polling right now, you will definitely be in Parliament representing ACT Party's immigration portfolio. And for the benefit of our broader Kiwian audiences, can you enlighten us with what ACT Party represents in terms of immigration?
Sure. Well, as others have said, before I get into that, I just want to say thank you for having me here. Very nice. I'm James McDowall, ACT candidate and a board member of the party. And outside of politics, I'm also the practice manager of a family-owned immigration law firm. So I get to hear about all of the gory on-the-ground details about immigration processing and what goes on and what goes wrong and all the difficulties that we face there. The caveat there is that as a practice manager, I don't do the casework, so I just want to put that out there. So ACT has always been a pro-immigration party and will continue to be one, of course. New Zealand is a nation of immigrants, and I think we can all agree that without people coming to New Zealand, we'd be a much poorer country without the infusion of new ideas and people. So those are the things of our principles: openness, attracting the right skills. How do we focus on the right skills? Does the current system of points actually work? And of course, being culturally aware in the way that we structure our visas. So I hope that gives you a rough answer to that.
Sure.
I would just tie on to the end of that. New Zealand does need to maintain its pre-COVID openness as we open up the economy. Many of our businesses and public services either couldn't function or would be much poorer without immigrants. So,
well, I get that.
Nice
that is a broad vision, I would say, but it doesn't translate into a plan or a policy that ACT would like to bring into the government if you get into the government along with National. So have you done a little bit more brainstorming that how, if ACT gets into the government in coalition with National, then how you would like to influence the immigration policies?
Skills shortages. So how do you, is the current system fit for purpose? And identifying where those shortages are, I would say that the point system is quite convoluted and doesn't necessarily work. There are other ways to achieve that, perhaps. One area we're looking at is average wages. So if there is an area where local businesses are paying considerably above the local average wage, or well above the average wage, then that would be a shortage potentially. So that's something you can also look to. Certainly no one wants to see successful businesses falling over because they can't get skilled employees. So secondary to that, of course, is this big COVID problem, right? We're on an immigration reset right now. And you've mentioned that parties aren't particularly talking about immigration a lot. I'd say there's a few reasons for that. From a minor, if I can still use that term, minor parties' point of view, when the main two parties aren't talking about it, aren't setting the agenda, it's a little bit, where do you sit? And also with New Zealand First polling so poorly, they're usually the ones going on about immigration quite a lot. So they haven't been doing too much. So that hopefully addresses that part.
Sure. No, thanks for that, James. Now, I will move back and ask Priyanka. Priyanka, you have made some very valid points in the opening statement about Labour Party's commitment of addressing the migrant exploitation issues, which is, of course, very dear to our Kiwi Indian community as well. But from what we recall, that was not just one of the main issues in last elections. Probably in 2017 election campaign, Labour was also campaigning on other promises, say for reducing the number of incoming net migrants in the league of 20 to 30,000 numbers. But from what we have seen in the last year, or probably in the 2020, the 12 months prior to the month ending June, we have seen there has been probably 20 to 25,000 increase from what were the net immigration numbers in 2017. So is it not a case that Labour Party has failed to deliver what they promised would be the main thing within their immigration promises in 2017, raising a question on their competency
Absolutely
to
not.
deliver on immigration platform?
Yeah, absolutely not. That was not one of the things that we campaigned on, actually. And I'll tell you where that's come from. So, what we did campaign on, and it actually, unfortunately or fortunately, goes back to eliminating exploitation, because what we had said was that we wanted to, a little bit of context here. So, what we had seen over the last decade when the National Party was in government was changes to settings like, for example, removing IELTS and other changes that incentivized the export education sector, because they had I think it was a $5 billion turnover mark that they were aspiring towards. And the way they met that revenue from that sector was to open the floodgates to students from countries like India and the Philippines. And as a caveat, I have no issue with international education and people coming here for that. I myself came here as an international student many, many years ago and got an excellent education in New Zealand. What I'm worried about is that that became a money-making exercise. So it incentivized PTEs. Some of them have a legitimate place in our system, many don't. And so it incentivized many dodgy PTEs to mushroom up because they saw this as a money-making exercise because of the settings that were changed by the previous government to make it so. And so people came in. I've spoken to students who had, their parents had sold land or houses back in India to fund their children's education in New Zealand. The child went to a PTE where, frankly, people have told me about jib boards being put up, teachers not teaching, teachers marking. There was a rort going on. So what happened to these students was that they ended up with a qualification that wasn't worth the paper it was written on. It didn't get them a job in New Zealand, and it didn't get them a job back home. We have seen suicides in this community because of students who are caught between a rock and a hard place. They can't stay here because they have no future, and they can't go home because their parents are in debt up to the hilt. So that is what we wanted to change. We said we would change that. We said that dodgy PTEs would have to shut down. Many have. And so then the numbers were translated by members of the media to then translate to 20 to 30,000. So that's probably where you got your figure from. But it's not a figure that we campaigned on. That was a figure that was the translation of what we wanted to achieve. And I would say that we've taken steps, significant steps towards that, and we're starting to see results.
Sure. Well, I would like Stuart to respond on that. What are your views, Stuart, with this Labour Party's allegations that they have inherited all the problems from the previous national government's immigration policies?
Well, that's their excuse for everything. So that's enough said.
9 years.
All right. Okay. Well,
3
that's very
years.
small rebuttal, I would say.
3 years of
But
neglect.
sure. Now, going back to Priyanka, you said that probably we media might have picked up, but from what I recall, the former leader Andrew Little and the current leader, Honorable Prime Minister, has also said many times, which is on record, that they are aiming to reduce the net migration numbers by 20 to 30,000, and I still stand by those. Numbers that we have heard directly from the leaders on a recorded interview. But anyways, going back and trying to understand what's your understanding about the pressing issues that our Kiwi Indian community is facing in terms of immigration.
Sure. And there are a fair few. For example, the issue with the partnership visa, and I'm going to front foot that because that was a massive issue and it impacted a number of people. I don't think I've ever had the number of emails from people from our communities on a single issue as we did during that time. And that became an issue because, strictly speaking, if you look at the culturally arranged marriage visitor visa category, it was created so that New Zealanders could go back to home countries, um, and bring somebody here to get married in New Zealand. So that's the way that that policy was set up. Now, historically, my understanding is that the way it was interpreted by immigration officials was a little bit more loosely. So people could go get married, say back in India, and then bring their spouse here, and then use that visa to fulfill the living together requirement, to then move on to a partnership-based visa. So that's what has been happening for a number of years. If you look strictly at the letter of the policy, that's not what it was meant for. And so there was a switch back by immigration officials to reinterpret that strictly, and that's where the problem came into play. And a number of people who expected that their visas would be successful, applications would be successful, were declined and didn't understand why. That shouldn't have happened, and so we reversed that. That was definitely one issue. Now, of course, we have the issue of people who are caught in that, having applied and being successful in their visitor visa, being stranded offshore. So that's now the next hurdle that we're going to have to address. The other issue, of course, is the parent category. And I again get, I've had a lot of people approach me about this. Again, there's no secret what happened there. It was effectively closed. They say put on hold, but closed by the previous national government. There doesn't seem to be any real reason to have done so. And so we said that we really want to reopen this and give people some certainty and have parents come here because it's incredibly important. And I understand that. I have, my parents don't live in New Zealand, so I totally understand where people are coming from and why, from a settlement point of view, it's really important. So we wanted to reopen that. However, at the cabinet table, in order to get consensus, you need parties to agree. We didn't get that agreement from New Zealand First unless we raised the thresholds to something that was dramatically unreachable for most people. But we thought, the better of the two evils was to actually reopen it with a higher threshold. And I've met people who have said that they would have been able to meet that threshold. Rather than to keep it closed for everyone. However, it's no secret that we want the thresholds lowered. So again, not preempting anything, but I'm just going to leave it at that.
Sure. Well, that's a
So
safe
those are
spot
some
to
of the
leave it.
issues. And I
Well,
would support lowering the threshold. So I'll just
no,
put that there
definitely.
as
Well,
Whole
well.
range
now
of
coming
topics
back
there.
to what you're saying,
Yeah,
probably
there
we
are.
have debated it many times on different platforms. But still, do you think that like the culturally arranged marriage visa thing, where the former immigration minister had intervened, do you think that action was able to fix the problem at all?
Yeah, it did fix the problem. I've heard from people for whom the problem was fixed because effectively it went back to what had been happening for a number of years. But we need a more sustainable fix.
Well, that's not exactly what figure says. I'm not sure if you have been following Indian Weekend lately. We have got data from Immigration New Zealand where it was confirmed that not a single visa under culturally arranged marriage visa category was issued in the months preceding to border closure. So we are talking about November 2019, December, January, February. There was not a one
Okay.
single culturally arranged marriage visa issued. So how do you think?
That's contrary to what I've heard from people who have had their visas approved. So I'm really interested in that, but I'm happy to look into it.
Sure. Okay. And coming back to your assurance on parent category visa, as we have discussed previous occasions, we were promised that coming to election, Labour Party will be coming loud and clear on what their stand is on the parent category visa. And here we are, just probably 10 days shy of election date, and we haven't got a policy. How would you front up that?
Correct. You'll get one soon.
Okay. Okay. That's a good promise. We will keep an eye on
Give
that.
you an ex party approach if you like.
All right. Okay.
It's
So I will
second
invite
coming.
James to. So,
Well, sorry,
yeah.
was it Stu's turn? Was it? I can.
It's your
No,
turn,
I would like.
James.
All right. Well, I just be very quick. Look, we oppose the moratorium on the parent category, and very simply, we would lower the thresholds. They're far too high. It went from, I think, 65k for a single child to 106,000 for one parent, 159 for two. So the reality is that many skilled migrants depend on the help of their parents, childcare, etc. And many skilled migrants will simply pick other countries if they can't have their parents here. So we would
Right.
lower the
Okay.
threshold.
Thank you very much. I will switch to Stuart. Stuart, we haven't heard much about your policies' views on these important issues that matter to broader Caribbean community, be it partnership visa issues, be it parent carry visa issues. So, would you have something to add?
Look, the parent category visa, we don't support the income thresholds. We don't think that the sponsoring child is the great way to measure the success of that. It's actually the parents coming in should be responsible for their own costs, and so in the case of medical costs, they would either have to have fully paid insurance or by way of a fee up front for them to come into the country, rather than the income of their family. Going back to why that was actually was Michael Woodhouse that brought that temporary hold on the parent category visa. That was due to advice that they had those parents coming into the country were accessing the health system at a much higher rate and at a much higher cost than the average New Zealander was at that time. That had, of course, the election intervened and nothing changed, despite what the Labour Party said they would do. They didn't do anything about it. One of my constituents actually took a petition to Parliament, which I accepted on this on the parent category visa. The Select Committee looked at this and really found that there wasn't as much concern or to be concerned about as had been the advice had been given to Michael Woodhouse. So we support that being opened up again when it's safe to do so. And of course, those parents coming in would have to be, that's obviously not as high a priority as getting essential workers across and critical workers across the border, which is the main focus of immigration at this stage and should be.
Sure. No, we will come back to that and have a little bit more detailed conversation. But do you think with all our three MPs from at least three important parties, there could be a convergence around how we can allow or get the parents in? Priyanka, would you be able to preempt what exactly Labour policy would be? Would be looking at income threshold or more towards self-sustaining?
I'm not going to preempt it, sorry.
Okay, I will take on that. Right. So the next issue is the temporary migrants who are stuck overseas. I do understand that each party has got a view on that, but their numbers, probably there is tens of thousands. And we need to get an understanding from each party how you would respond to their situation. Currently, they have been stranded overseas because our borders have been locked, and there is no clear plan for them that how long they should be holding on their visas, which have already expired. Would they be allowed with dignity to come back and either continue their lives or maybe pack their bags for good and leave. So I would like to hear views of opposition first. So, Stuart, uh, has your party given a thought on would you be honoring the visas of those temporary migrants stuck overseas?
Yeah, as soon as we've got capacity to get them across the border, we should be doing that. But obviously, critical workers are first, and they may well be, some of those people may well be critical workers. But we believe they should be responsible for their own quarantine costs, that they should be able to come back so long as their the role, that the job they're going to take up, pass the labour market test. But that will require Immigration New Zealand to carry that test out in a highly efficient manner. They're not doing that currently, and that has to change. The issue with Immigration New Zealand and some of the processes, rather antiquated processes they go through, is it's actually sand in the gears of the economy, and we can't have that. It has to be much more efficient than it is now.
Okay, well, that is a line where probably you are towing what exactly Labour Party is saying or doing in the government.
Well, no,
that
we never tow Labour's line. They tow ours, I think, if anything. But you know,
You wish.
but
well, the point
you know,
is,
absolutely, we take imitation on their part as a sincerest form of flattery.
okay. Now, what I want to resubmit is that when we are addressing those temporary migrant workers who were having legitimate visas, and what we are now saying to them is just because we have decided arbitrarily behind their back to close the borders, now suddenly we are bringing new rules, new expectations, new conditions that they should be critically high skilled workers by dishonoring their previous legitimate visas that New Zealand government has given them and allowed them to have multiple entries. And it was on one of those occasions when they were traveling overseas that we have chosen to close our border behind their back without giving them ample warning. So, do you think it's a good look as a country that we choose not to decide and do justice with them and make their entry back into conditional to our MIQ facilities, Stuart?
Oh, well, I think there's no doubt that closing of the borders wasn't handled very well. That said, we're in this position now. I just think the labour market test is the test that is absolutely essential. If that job is there for them and it meets the labour market test, then they should be able to return.
Okay. Priyanka, can we expect anything different than what Labour Party-led coalition government has been doing in the last 5-6 months in dealing with this big crisis?
Just before I get to that, though, you did tell us that we had an opportunity to respond to points made by some of my colleagues on
Sure.
this call.
Mike is
And
yours.
I'd like to actually ask Stuart a question, because you can't have it both ways, Stuart, and you've
We
claimed
asked
to
the
want to
question.
do that. You have said in your response, and I quote, you said that we will let them all in as soon as it's safe to do so. That was your immediate response to Sandeep's question. And then you pivoted to a labour market test and alluded to the fact that we closed the border in a way that, made these people stranded overseas, and your party in government would not have done that. So I'd really like you to explain that. How do you have it both ways? How will you let them all in as soon as it's safe to do so, but then subject them to a labour market test? Isn't that then saying that the labour market has changed and we need to make sure that there are jobs for them before we let them all in? How will you do both?
Well, I actually said that we'll let those in if they subject to the labour market test and they pay their own quarantine. That's
You
what I
said
said.
all of it. So I'm just gonna
Oh,
call you out on that, because you can't have it both
well,
ways. So anyway, I'll get back to what your
Well,
question
Priyanka, I
was,
would like to
Sandeep.
answer on that before you go on and make your point. That probably if the government would have been very clear when announcing border closure, that if the temporary migrants are not coming back now, probably they will lose the chance forever, and give them a 15 days
Yeah.
window, probably they would have taken the right call at that moment. What do you
We
think about
couldn't have
that?
done that, Sandeep. So we gave as much notice as possible. The Foreign Affairs
There
Minister
was no
put a
notice
statement
for the
out. There
temporary
was
visa
notice.
holders.
No, that's untrue. That's untrue. There
Well,
was
I can
the
follow it
Foreign
up
Affairs.
that there
I
was
can
no
follow it up
notice
too,
for temporary
and I'm
visa
happy
holders.
to. There was a notice
Yeah.
for everybody who said that if you want to come back, the borders are closing. And that was roughly 2 days before it closed. It wasn't a huge amount of time, but it was the time that we were able to give. Now, bearing in mind that this is a pandemic that we've never experienced before at this scale. We've never shut a country, no government has shut a country before. There's never been a playbook for addressing or dealing with COVID. And so we acted on the advice we were given consistently throughout this. The public health advice that we were given. Initially, the advice that was provided that was that we should shut the border to everyone, including New Zealand citizens and residents. Our government made the call that we cannot legally, and we would not want to ethically, stop New Zealand citizens and permanent residents who have a legal right to reside permanently in New Zealand from coming across the border. So we kept the border open to them. We put that message out that the border will be shutting to everybody else. That was the message that went out before the border closed, and I absolutely stand to that. However, I want to address this issue because it's frankly probably the toughest issue I've had to deal with in my 3 years in Parliament. It's not a place that I'd like to be in. But, and that's why I wanted to make that point with Stuart, because there is actually no other way to do this. So public health of New Zealanders has to be paramount. And for that, the border remains our main line of defense to COVID coming in here. We've got one of the strongest border regimes, so I'll
Good
push
job.
back on what Stuart said as well. And Forbes, if you've read recently, came out and ranked us second out of 250 countries nationwide. And part of that, a large part of that, was our border regime, the strength of it, and our quarantine facilities. We've had close to 50,000 people come across the border. We've only had a handful of those, people who've tried to escape that Stuart has alluded to, in terms of the border not being as strong as it can. So, I completely push back on that. And I think
Right.
New
Well, okay.
Zealanders and the
I will repeat
international
my question to
community
you,
has
Priyanka. My
recognized
question
that.
was that
Yes,
will
I'm
there be
just
any
getting to
major
that.
change or departure from
Yeah,
what we
there's
have been
already
seeing?
been change, Sandeep. So I'm explaining out the context as to why the border needs to remain closed
It's about
and
50 minutes.
opened slowly, which is what we've done. So as MIQ facilities, capacity at the facilities has increased, and we've almost doubled that, we're able to take in more people. We've seen, as I mentioned, close to 50,000 people. The priority has been for New Zealanders in residence, as almost every country has done. That's beginning to tail off as well. And so capacity will increase. And so we've made it easier for people, some temporary migrants who
Stuart.
have a job here, to come back here.
Sure.
Residents,
Well, I think Stuart
who
has
need
some point to make.
Yeah,
Stuart, what are you saying?
I think she's had about 90% of the time so far.
I've been asked quite a few questions.
Yeah, sure. So, what do you intend to add?
Just reinforcing. Yes, I do actually. The border control is is not just people escaping, although that was very badly handled. They haven't been tested. They didn't test when they said they were going to. They assured everyone people were being tested at 3 days. We found out they're not. Apparently, the shutdown was all to do with, and the lockdown was all to do with the public health advice. Share that. They haven't shared. I bet you haven't seen it, Priyanka, because no one else has either. So I think that's all a load of nonsense.
Cabinet's seen it.
Right. Okay. Now, Stuart, coming back to MIQ facilities, like if you come in the government, would you be enhancing that capabilities? Would you be investing more? Maybe opening a few capacities just exclusively for temporary migrants stuck overseas who would be paying for their own MIQ charges, quarantine charges?
Well, obviously it has to be safe and meet the right standards, but I don't think we're doing an A1 job now, so there's certainly room for improvement, and that's something we'd like to look at. There's a number of things that need to be looked at in that area, but the main thing, right, for a start off, is to make sure people are tested before they get on an aircraft to come here, and we've just seen plenty of evidence of why that should be done now. They still haven't moved. To make sure that they're tested at day 3, and then of course just before they leave quarantine. So those are the things
that is something again aligned with the broader issues.
Well, that's the number one issue for a start off, to get that right. And it's
Right,
not right
okay.
yet, and we're well into this now. It should have been sorted very quickly, and it hasn't been.
Right. So I will get James' views. James, you have been quietly sitting over there. Thanks for your patience. I do appreciate that. But
All
we
right.
need to understand, if you are in government and you would be negotiating with, I'm sure, with Stuart on the other side, would you like to bring some points on immigration that you want immediate changes? How to address the immediate challenges that our country is facing on that front?
Yeah, I mean, so we've delved very far from the original question, but I would, regarding people stranded overseas, I mean, it's an awful situation. As somebody obviously involved in a law firm, this is something you receive just countless emails on a daily basis. You don't have to be a politician to hear about these stories. So it is an awful situation. And the border situation is not a very innovative one. It hasn't been the best. And with the government trying to do it all on its own and not working with the private sector perhaps and setting rules, then we can't get any innovation there. So regarding those on visas stranded overseas specifically, I would be inclined to reset those visas. So for the times that they have lost on their visa, to regain that. Now, of course, there'll be a complicated set of who actually still wants to come back. You know, they may have set up new lives where they are now. So not everybody will want their visas reset. So you need to fast track the sort of the reapplication on that. And that will be based on how innovative and efficient you can get the border. Obviously, the two problems with that at the moment is we have, I mean, we've been dining out on Immigration New Zealand a little bit, and justifiably so. So they're simply not good enough. And MIQ has not been quite good enough. So that's the short answer there.
Yeah.
And if I could say one other thing about Immigration New Zealand, I mean, look, unlike most white collar organisations over the 6-week lockdown, they couldn't do anything. They couldn't process applications, and that simply wasn't good enough. So, and I think now from an EOI to a residence completion, you know, we're talking an estimate of about 18 months. So it's just utterly hopeless.
Sure. Thanks for that. Now, going back to Stuart, if you come into government, if National comes into government, so what would be your offering in the first 100 days within immigration portfolios?
Getting the border crossings right. That's number one.
Well, that's not your portfolio. We have got a special.
Everything flows from that, and so we've got critical workers we need to get across the border. We've got RSE workers that we need to get across the border. I was in Central Otago yesterday talking to fruit growers that are desperately worried about how they will be able to pick their fruit. It is unlikely all the fruit will be picked in Central Otago in this coming summer because we don't have the staff to do it. We need to get RSE workers across the border, but the current government has got no plans to do so. So that will be a significant economic cost for New Zealand to bear, and the very industries that we need to get us out of this deep economic mire that we're in and about to enter. It'll be much worse in the next few months. We need these industries to be able to function fully, but they're not going to. Some of them aren't because we can't get the labour.
Okay, so would you consider, like right now we have probably around 20 to 30,000 temporary migrant workers who are in different processing queues with Immigration New Zealand, and they are onshore. So would you be considering giving them permanent residency so that we don't have to go through the border issues and still address the labor shortage that we might experience? Stuart.
Well, we've got no plans to short circuit the residency queue, no.
All right, okay. Priyanka, I have to ask you again, if we have got the Labour-led government minus Winston Peters, so what can we expect from your government in immigration space in the first 100 days?
Yeah, you've had your turn, Stuart. It's mine now. So just very quickly before I get to that, I'm going to say that one of our policies that we have released is a 10% quota at MIQ facilities for critical workers who need to come across the border. We've already announced that, and we've said that we'll continue to work with Business New Zealand and
So do it
businesses
now.
generally. We are.
Do it
We've
before
already
the
committed
election.
to doing it now. And that we will work with businesses to ensure that we match their needs to this is really distracting in such poor form because I mute myself when you're speaking, Stuart. So anyway, so that's one of the things that we've already committed to and that we'll continue doing. Also, to respond to Stuart, there's already multiple testing that happens at MIQ facilities, including the third day testing, and they have to test negative before they're allowed to leave. So a little bit of what he said is actually false. Now, in terms of what you can see in immigration more broadly with a Labour-led government, it goes back to the points that I made right at the start to continue to ensure that we stamp out exploitation in the labour market because it's absolutely unfair what has been going on to our people for a very long time. The second thing about matching skills to the needs of employers, and COVID has changed that, and you know, there are two aspects in terms of temporary migrants stranded overseas. One is the facilities at MIQ and needing to be, absolutely sure that it's safe as we let a larger number of people through. But the other is that the labour market has changed dramatically because of COVID. The 50,000 odd, close to 50,000 people we've seen come back also bring experiences and skills. So when we say that, when Stuart said at the start, and I agree with him, that we need to see how the landscape changes because of COVID, and we're not there yet. We haven't seen the final changes because it's continuing to happen. So we need to make sure that we have the skills, that we utilize the skills that are coming
Sure.
back
Well,
with the
I will
employers
stop
who
you there
need those
because we are
skills.
running short of time,
Yeah,
Priyanka.
so we'll continue to do that in government.
Right. Stuart, would you have a response to what Priyanka has just asserted about the plan of government? I think we are having some technical issues. Stuart, you're there? Sorry, I think.
Sorry about that.
Stuart, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, would you have any response to what Priyanka was saying?
Oh, look, I think they're long on rhetoric and low on action. The reality is immigration hasn't been handled well. There's a lot of work that could be done that over this intervening period that hasn't. So I think that's a shame. But for us, the number one priority is to get things right at the border. And that, as you say, is not my responsibility, but actually nothing else can happen unless that's right and safe. And it's not at the moment. And we have to get more critical workers across the border. I've spent a huge amount of time right through this period dealing with businesses who can't get critical workers across the border, and it's cost jobs. And I've also got people that are investing significant sums of money in New Zealand, and that's at risk because they can't get into New Zealand. Yet we allow orchestra conductors to come in. I mean, they've got this all wrong. Their priorities are completely, well, we don't know what they are. They're not transparent. They need to be open and transparent. And that would be very helpful for business.
Okay, I
The
get
only
that.
way we're going to pay for this is to have successful businesses in New Zealand, and they're being stifled at the moment by the actions or lack of actions by this government.
Okay. Thanks for that, Stuart. James,
Can I
I
also
would
add
like to get a final closing statement from you because
Well-
we are running short of time. So if you are in government, if actors in government with national, I've asked you before as well, but would you be putting some demands or requests at the negotiation table with national in terms of immigration policy?
It's all about taking a risk-based approach to the border in terms of looking at countries like in the islands where they don't have COVID and saying, why aren't we letting these people in so that they can work where they want to work in the RSE scheme, etc. So it all comes down to the border, as Stuart says. There's so much to fix there. And then there's the visa situation and the prioritisation. That's the main thing. One other, just last thing I wanted to touch on, because it has been raised but not discussed on the side, is around migrant abuse. So this is something that has, bothered me for some time, and it is a bit of a a bit of a complex issue, but three things going through my mind. We perhaps need to tighten the rules for employers of migrants, where the labour inspector has more capability to make unannounced visits more frequently. So that's something I would support. We perhaps need some sort of agency. What that looks like, I'm not sure. Where migrants can ask employment questions about their rights. There certainly needs to be more education there. And then there's this contentious issue that I won't make a commitment on, but it's about looking into it, is around the referral percentages and referral fees. And you end up with desperate and unsuspecting would-be migrants. And this is this whole
Sure.
relationship between private institutes and other things. So that's something we should look into as well, because there's some of that is just frankly
I
extortion.
get that. Thanks for that, James.
Mm.
We are just finished with the time, so I will have to cut this short. Priyanka, would you have a final statement to make on how your government, if you are back in government, would be doing things a bit differently? Just keep it short, please.
Yeah, look, so as I mentioned previously, we've had a plan to ensure that we keep New Zealand safe. We now have a plan to ensure that we rebuild the economy together and that we do it in a way that is sustainable and withstands
So
the
is there a
long-term
plan for
challenges
immigration?
that we have. Sorry?
Is there a
Yeah,
plan
well,
for immigration?
the one that we've announced is the 10% quota at the MIQ facilities to ensure that we get the critical workers and so on that we need across the border. And you will be seeing specific policies rolled out very shortly.
Great.
That I won't
Thank you
comment.
very much. On
And
that
you've seen the
assurance,
view that I've
on that,
outlined.
I get that. On that assurance, I will have to apologize. We have to cut this short. So first of all, thank you very much, all ladies and gent, for taking your time and sharing your respective parties' plan on immigration. And I will leave it to our viewers and audiences to understand, if they were able to comprehend what your political party's plan was on immigration. But I do appreciate you taking your time and discussing it on our website. Thank you.
Thank you.